Okay, so welcome. A wonderful showing here this morning. Glad that you could all make it. And of course, we're here to discuss a little bit more about the ANDE study, which for many of you being data entry folks may be new to you. Not sure how much everyone is in the loop, so we are going to include a little brief introduction on the study this morning. But first and foremost, I am Michael McCarty. Many of you know me, of course, as the project manager here with eData Tech Support. Joining us this morning are several folks. We've got a whole team today. Steve from the MIS project is here. Amanda from the division is here, and we have some folks from West Ed joining us. And West Ed are the folks that are running the ANDE project and doing the study. So the format for today is going to be that we're going to introduce you to the ANDE study. We're going to talk a little bit about some data entry considerations and some new things related to all of the project, study, classes, adults, and staff. So those folks who are involved in the project and how we'll manage that and monitor that in eData. And then we'll wrap up where we would like to get your feedback after you've had a chance to see everything so that you can tell us a little bit about maybe some ideas that you have and some thoughts about, how this data entry consideration might impact your data entry routine. So these are draft proposals, if you will. They're still in development, though I think they're pretty close to what is needed to help the study. And so the purpose of the day is run those items past you and see a little bit about what you think and get your feedback. So without further ado, I'll cycle to this slide. And I know you're here, Brian. I think some of your team's here as well. I'm trying to look at if you would like to maybe introduce yourselves from the West Ed side to everybody and maybe also mention a little bit about your project.
Sure. My name is Brian Matlin. I'm a senior researcher at West Ed. It's a research organization based in primarily the western coast of the U.S., but we have offices all over the U.S. And we're really interested in a lot of things, but in this context, we're really interested in developing a course to support adult numeracy for adult learners. And in this study, we're going to be testing the course that we've created to see the kinds of impacts that it has on student learning or learners learning. So that's why we're all here. I'm also joined by my colleague, or maybe colleagues, but Ashley and Douglas. Ashley, do you want to say hi?
Yeah, hello everyone. My name is Ashley Ann Douglas, and I'm a researcher at West Ed, like Brian said, with the math education team. We are very happy to have your help. So looking forward to this. And it might just be the two of us, so
I'm here, actually. I
perfect.
apologize for being late. I've daycare drop off this early, but my name is Carolyn Espinosa. I'm also a part of the math team at West Ed, and I'm the project manager for the ANDE project. It's nice to meet everyone.
Fantastic. Well, thank you all for joining us and for being here in support. And so what I'll say is I know Carolyn and team Brian and Ashley, and we've had a chance through various webinars to discuss some of the data items that I'm about to present. But if there's anything while I'm presenting that would help provide context in terms of the study and maybe why things are the way they are, or other thoughts, please do feel free to jump in. But as I mentioned earlier, our format's going to be is that I'll jump right into the data entry items that we have for you, and then we'll get feedback from all of you from the agency level here toward the end. So without further ado, there are three main record types that will be in consideration when it comes to the ANDE study. And the idea that we're thinking through here today is that to be able to have an effective study, Ashley and Brian and Carolyn are going to need to have really good, solid data. And so to get that data and extract it from all the other data that you know that you're recording in eData, we need to be able to put labels and identify the items that are specifically related to ANDE. So again, that's going to be in class records, adult records, and staff records. So there's a series of conventions that we've developed here in order to, you can think of them as labels, to put these labels on the various record types to help us identify and isolate those items that are specifically in the ANDE study. We can start with classes. And I did put a note here that for the ANDE classes, you'll need to create a new class record for each ANDE class so that it can be standalone. We'll talk a little bit more about the details for that and why that is when we get to some attendance considerations in a few slides from now. For classes specifically, we'd like to have the ANDE abbreviation, ANDE, added as a suffix to the class name field. You could see the example on screen. Maybe you have a class that's something, you each have your own unique naming conventions that vary through your different agencies. But let's say you had something like ABE Library, Math Level 1 to indicate a location and the level of the course, and of course the content being math. And then you would just append to that at the end a suffix of ANDE. And then additionally, outside of all the name field would also be the keyword field would contain ANDE, which can be added to an existing keyword convention that you might be using in the keyword field. It could be at the beginning, in the middle, the end, doesn't matter. We can find it as long as it's consistently entered as ANDE. That's, again, so we can identify which classes are using that ANDE curriculum. Next are the adults that are going to be assigned to and involved in participating with the ANDE curriculum. And for the adults, there's two items to consider, and that would be first the keyword field. So you're going to see this keyword field a lot. This is really consistent across all the participants and classes for the course. And so ANDE here, same idea. You all use your adult keyword field for different things, but the idea is entering and adding the ANDE keyword will help us identify as we need to adults that should be receiving any kind of ANDE instruction. Also, in the adult specific goals section, it would help if you put ANDE course participant as a goal under the adult specific goals. So not agency specific goals, but on that tab in the adult specific goals section, ANDE course participant, and that can be added as a goal with the set date equal to the date of that individual's initial class attendance. And I believe in conversations, I think you mentioned, Brian, that you were interested in making sure that you knew when the class, when the student was first attending a class, and we could check the hours, but we thought this might be a good backup to also have it indicated here. So those are the adult specific goals. And just so you're all aware, you don't have to take notes on this because this webinar is being recorded. We're going to post it. And these aren't necessarily 100% final labels. This is the direction that we're headed. And I think these are pretty close to where we'll end up. But in January, there's the follow-up webinar, which I'm thinking most of you are already aware of. And during January's webinar, we'll actually roll out the official decided elements that will be decided upon after today's meeting in some team meetings. And we'll provide some documentation with all of this. So you won't have to remember this. You don't have to take a bunch of notes now. So that was the adult labels. Staff labels are pretty simple. We're back to the keyword field again. And Mary, we'll get to your question in a second. That I know that that's going to come up in terms of the study group versus the control group. So we'll get to that in a second. So that just to finish the different labels for staff records, the last record type we're going to talk about, the keyword field, also ANDE. So Brian and Ashley Ann and Carolyn, there is a question in the chat, and that is from Mary, one of the administrators at a program. And she asks, our instructor is in the control group. Do we need to start a new math class and use any labels for the control group?
I think ideally we would have a new course record for control as well, because we would want to be tracking the same information across cohort 1 and cohort 2.
Okay, looks like we got a thumbs up for that. And that I think keeps it simple as well for all of you to think about. It's not a case of wondering, am I in the control, am I in the study, or somewhere in between. It's just, is this ANDE curriculum? And if it is, track it with the previous keywords and other field adjustments that we mentioned. Thanks, Carolyn. Getting back to the class, there are a couple things to think about when you create the new class. So one of the reasons that we're having you create a new class record specifically for ANDE is so that we can track attendance more precisely. The standard expectation for classes, because of the expectation of data being entered within 2 weeks of it occurring, is that you'll enter at least weekly, if not bi-weekly, your class information. I think most of you, from what we see, enter your classes by the week. So you just sum it up and enter your attendance once a week. For the ANDE classes, we're looking for a little more precision. So we want daily data entry, and I'll get to that in a moment. But that's just part of the reason why we're asking that you create a new record for each ANDE class. When you create it, you can see the following 2 items on the screen here. And so the first, you can see the start date field is to set the start date as the first date of the ANDE instruction, which is pretty much in line with what you already do. Its start date would be when the class starts, but there's just that extra layer of consideration thinking, when does the class start using the ANDE curriculum? And then the assign date when assigning an adult to the ANDE class, of course, use the date the adult first attended with hours greater than 0. So that would be meaning, of course, in other words, their first attendance. And that's another layer in the sense that you're usually assigning students to a class about when they start, but there's a little more precision involved because of the study, and we want to know the day that the student started, and the assign date will help keep everything in line as you're entering the data and your attendance. Continuing on with each ANDE class, the attendance should be entered, as we mentioned, by the day. So one attendance record for each day the class meets. For example, if the previously mentioned ABE Library Math class meets on, let's say, Tuesdays and Thursdays, so let's say it's a 12-9 and 12-11, I guess that'd be Monday and Wednesday. But attendance would be added for 12-9 in one record, and then 12-10 in another record, and so on. And I apologize, that's a typo. That should be 12-9 and 12-11. But I think you get the idea, is you should be entering attendance once per day, not per week. All right. And now we get to the part for the feedback. And before we start on this specific slide, I saw some action here in the chat. Are we caught up with questions in the chat? It looks like there was a question answered there. Looks like, yeah, okay. So Ruth, you got your question answered. So now, having seen those different items, the labels and the new class records and the attendance for classes, what do you think might be missing? And this is really a question also for you, WestEd team, and then for you as the agencies, but then also specifically for the agencies, what types of burdens do these data entry instructions perhaps put on data entry staff? What are some things to think about? We always get really good feedback from all of you when we ask these types of questions. So we're really curious to know before we dive in and make any final decisions. I mean, honestly, some things might just be what they are, but if there's some flexibility, it would help to hear from you if you have any thoughts or considerations. So feel free to unmute yourself and let us know, or type something in the chat, whatever is most convenient for you.
Hi, Michael. This is Ruth.
Yes.
I just wonder what the time frame for this is. Like, are they asked to use these materials or to track their students for a specific time?
That's a really great question. We are really asking them for cohort 1, if they're teaching the ANDE course, it would be from the time that they start using the ANDE course through when they finish teaching our mini course B. The course is made up of actually 4 mini courses, A, B, C, and D, but we're only asking teachers to complete A and B for now. And then for the cohort 2, if they're not using ANDE, it would be from the time that they go through our launch workshop in January, very beginning of January, through when they complete our post measures, which is like the end of there's a math assessment for students and things along those lines. We would alert teachers when they are completed. Brian and Ashley, feel free to jump in.
Do you anticipate any, like, will this be through the end of our grant year? Should we just assume that?
That's a great question. So ANDE mini courses A and B, we anticipate them to take about 5 weeks each, depending on cadence, of course, how many times teachers meet a week and the length, of course, their sessions. So it could be that we're only asking them to record this information for 10 weeks, or until they finish, which, might be give or take a few weeks. And then for the cohort 2, it would be around the same timeline for those teachers in cohort 1. It's going to be about 10 to 15 weeks, maybe.
And Michael, you're talking about entering attendance daily.
Yes.
So daily attendance records for the class.
Yes. Yes, that's my understanding. And please do correct me if I'm wrong, Wested. I know that that was something that your team had specified was really important so that you could know precisely when students were not only entering, but also potentially exiting.
Yeah, I think part of the motivation too is to get a sense of how much time they actually got exposure to the ANDE course. So if we know the days that they attended when the ANDE course is being taught, then we can know that. And so that means that, it would be useful to have by day, but wouldn't have to be uploaded necessarily each day, as long as there's a record of that and it were updated at some point.
And is the measuring stick assessment scores? Is that what you're looking at? Hours and assessment? For like outcome of the curriculum.
Our assessment of ANDE course in terms of its impact on students.
Yes.
Yeah, we're looking at a variety of different outcomes. Some of them are assessments on math knowledge. Others are digital literacy, self-confidence, and we're also looking at hours of attendance and things like, persistence in the course.
So those are things that instructors are like completing with students, not necessarily just our state assessment.
Right. There are some measures that, like our math knowledge assessment, that instructors will be administering as part of the study. And then other measures like, total hours attended in the course or persistence in the course. Those are things that eData already collects. So we'll use a variety of sources to collect that.
I've heard the term cohort 1 and cohort 2. So like our students, our program was chosen for the control group. Am I to assume then that there will be another run where we will be using the curriculum? Is that like what cohort 2 is for?
Right. Yeah, sorry, we didn't explain that. Cohort 1 is the spring 2025 semester, so the upcoming um uh semester. And then cohort 2 would be the fall 2025. So yeah, that assumption is right, assuming the instructor wants to participate again.
Gianna, yes, you have your hand up. Did you want to?
Yeah. My question, so yesterday I attended the administrator training and they told us that for the treatment group, the mini course is 5 weeks long and that each day is about 90 minutes. My question is, when we do the attendance entries, like our classes are 3 hours long. So if our instructor is doing ANDE materials for 90 minutes, do they just enter the 90 minutes for the ANDE course and then they have to have a separate course for like the other 90 minutes for our, the rest of their class? Like that's the part that I'm kind of struggling with because all the class, I know for a fact that I have one teacher who's going to be doing the pilot. Her class is already established as a 3 hour course that meets twice a week. So like how do we work that?
And I think you're just to add to that thought for the team that's here thinking about it. Mary also asked in the chat a couple questions for like, oh, well, Lauren, actually, I apologize. What if instructors are teaching multiple subjects? So I think that kind of ties in with what you're saying, Gianna, is if the instructor's time with their students is a long period of time, I think you had mentioned 3 hours, and only part of that time is ANDE, how do you track it? I think that's ultimately the question.
Yes, that's the question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. All these are great questions. Uh, I think we're really interested in whether the students got exposure to ANDE, and we're trying to measure that through their logs of attendance on the days that ANDE are taught. So the grain size at which you record, has to strike a balance between um, a data point that would reflect, be a good proxy for that construct, and then also is feasible for everyone. So to me, it seems like just recording whether they attended that day, regardless of whether there were other activities going on, is probably would suffice as that uh, the grain size that would support our work. And so, but yeah, so does that answer your question? To summarize, just the attendance for that day would be useful, even if there's other activities or parts of the course that were not ANDE.
Okay, so for this particular class, so let's say it's, I'm making up something, but if it's like Tuesday, Thursday, 9 to 12, and from 9 to 10:30, they're going to do ANDE, and then the rest of the time they do something else. Basically, we would just establish the course in eData, put the keyword ANDE on the end, make sure all of those students have ANDE, all of the students that are in that class, and then record for the entire 3 hour, like put 3 hours because it's a 3 hour long class, or however much time the learner was there, even if they only spent 90 minutes on ANDE.
I think so, because
Okay.
that seems to be the most, I think any finer grain size than that seems like it would be a pretty big lift.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you.
And it looks like, Amanda, you have a comment to add to the discussion?
Yeah, I happened to see a couple of questions there around related to the entering data daily. And I think we
Mhm.
want to clarify so first of all, West Ed, you're not going to be pulling the data in real time, right? You're going to be pulling it, say, I'm making up a date, but like in April, right?
Right.
So I think that we're not saying that if a person has a class, if a teacher has a class on 12/9, that the data entry people have to enter that attendance on that date. Like the data entry itself doesn't have to happen that date. It's that when the data entry person is entering attendance, that they enter it by the day. So you might have a situation in which you do it within the 14 days, where in the past you might have just had one entry for, 12 hours, say for example, Gianna's example, where she has 2 classes twice a week, 3 hours each time. You might in the past have said, okay, that student attended 12 hours, whereas now we're saying, okay, you're going to enter, 12, 12:10, 3 hours, 12:12, 3 hours, 12:18, 3 hours, that kind of thing. But you don't necessarily have to enter it on the day that the class happens. I'm not sure if I'm making sense
That
there or
makes
not.
sense. Yeah,
It
that makes
does. The records are by the day, not the data entry.
Right. Yes. Thank you.
Right. Yeah, thank you for clarifying that, Amanda. And I see another question in the chat if we're okay to move on.
Yeah.
But do the math classes, treatment and control, need to be managed enrollment with no new students joining once the class begins? That's also a really good question. I think it would be okay to add students as you normally would. To the extent possible, we're trying to conduct an unbiased test of our course. And to do that, we're really just interested in what's the impact of the course, not on any other factors. So to do that, it would be helpful if you are assigning students to courses to do so in the regular way, trying to sort of ignoring the fact of whether they're ANDE or not. And so that would help us to ensure we have a fair test of our course, and at the end of the day, we can, attribute any differences we see in our outcomes to ANDE and not anything else, if that makes sense.
I do just want to quickly say, I think what Brian said is correct. There was from our professional development team a recommendation that if possible, it tends to be easier on the teacher if students come in at the start of a mini course versus in between. However, we know that that's not always possible. And so, while a recommendation, we realize that students may be coming in at any time.
Lauren, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, just to confirm, just so I'm getting all this, and this is all really great. I feel like the questions are getting answered pretty thoroughly, but we're just going to be kind of ending our classes from previously and just opening up these new class records, tagging on ANDE. Like we have open enrollment classes, multi-subject classes. So, basically what we're doing is just creating new classes with the ANDE. That's correct? Sorry.
Yes.
Okay.
And the feedback that you're all providing, including the questions, are super helpful, not only just to give us things to think about and help clarify for you, but we'll take them into consideration when we develop the documentation for you to follow. So we'll try to fill in any gaps that might have been in place today in terms of the thoughts, like the attendance being daily records, not necessarily entered daily, those kind of clarifications. We'll pull that together for you by the time we run through this in the January timeframe. There was one question that or comment that came in just directly to me. I'll kind of read it out loud for everybody. And it was a thought of the concern, maybe the length of the keyword, ANDE, maybe not having enough room, depending on what the agency's already using in the keyword field. That's certainly something that we could put some thought into in the meantime. So thank you for that suggestion. And I I think we'll just have to think about that and just determine if we are going to be able to identify the participants in another way. I know we have the staff identified. The students really are by number and quantity going to be the ones that I think would be the more critical to identify with that ANDE keyword. But we can take a look at that. I don't know if I have an immediate comment on that now, unless somebody else has any thoughts about the keyword field and maybe not having room for ANDE.
Hey, Michael, I have a question.
Sure, Rachel.
Okay. So when we put in our teacher for ANDE, do we need to create a new teacher, or do we just stick ANDE on at the end of the teacher's record?
The instructor, the staff will just be adding the keyword to the staff. You would assign the staff to the ANDE class per your normal staff assignment process. So I don't think there's any kind of changing of what you had mentioned.
Okay. And then just to clarify, so we have classes that teach, the way I do attendance is I do it for the whole day, different teachers and things. Should I make a specific class and put in the data just for this Andy's math class to make it easier for them to track the data instead of, you know, they've been there 10 hours. They didn't spend 10 hours doing ANDE. I don't have any problem making a new class. I'm just wondering, is that necessary for their data instead of just easier on me not to do that?
Well, and I don't know if you want to field this one again, Brian. I think this circles back to the comments you made earlier, just about to what degree of precision is required. I know you used some different terminology, but to what level of precision is required for the study for you to get what you need. I think you're suggesting, Rachel, getting down really into separating it out. And I think, Brian, you had mentioned maybe that wasn't entirely necessary, but I don't want to summarize incorrectly.
Yeah,
I just want to skew the data. So I'd rather you get the data that you actually need instead of saying we spent 10 hours doing it when we only spent an hour and a half.
right.
It sounds like it'd be best to, like, we're open entry also. And if my instructor is using it with her like Math 2 class, I might give the existing class an end date and then open up a new class and put all her students in that, earmark it ANDE, earmark the students ANDE. But I agree, I would think we should start a new class. Wouldn't you think, Michael?
It's going to be, so the part of the reason is so what Brian is speaking about is the end result that they need as researchers to study the effects and the effectiveness of the curriculum. Part of our task here at the MIS side, so what Steve and I will need to do is take all of the export from eData, isolate who is participating in ANDE. That would include the class, the staff, and the adults. And then give that, we scrub it of personally identifiable data, and then we present it as research usable data to the WestEd team. So part of our goal in having labels put on all the different record types, while it is an extra step for all of you, it's so that we have the ability to identify and pull out, again, isolate the data that ANDE needs, and just all the other stuff is just background noise. It's not necessary. So really that intermediate part where we have to we have to capture that study data and send it along is another big reason why those labels with the keywords and with the classes and having a separate class record with the precision of the daily attendance records that's where that came from in large part. So it's really kind of a team thing between both with what WestEd needs and what we need to be able to send the data along. And Amanda,
can I jump in again? So
please.
I think Ruth, what you said is correct. So for example, at the point in January, when the class when the teacher's gotten trained and is starting to do ANDE, for data entry purposes, you'll want to create a new class, right? So that when Michael and Steve pull the data, they know, okay, this is the class that started for ANDE. So it's not it's not necessarily including old hours. To Rachel, I think it was Rachel Fulton, I think you had the question. I think one of the nuances around like the lengths of the class and the content that's being covered is, I think in some agencies, for example, it might be a 3-hour class and all of the students are attending the full 3 hours. And those 3 hours might be a little bit of math, it might be a little bit of reading, you might do a little bit of science, something like that. But the students, the students are there for the full 3 hours, even if not all of those 3 hours are the ANDE curriculum. Rachel, it sounded like you might have a class where, it's kind of like maybe a drop-in over 10 hours for a full day, and only a portion of that day might be ANDE, and there might be like not everyone who attends that day will necessarily have done ANDE. Is that what you were saying? I'm just trying to understand like your situation.
Yes. So
Right.
we have the way it was set up before I got here, all the people who are attending during a block of time, there are 4 different teachers. So what I can do is I can create a math class for just the people doing ANDE.
I think that makes sense. Like, I don't think we want to have a situation where it looks like people are receiving the ANDE curriculum when in fact they might actually be doing math with another teacher at that time period. Yeah. I think in that case, yes, what you're saying makes sense. Whereas I think like in Gianna, your case, it sounds like you might have a group of students who are there for the full 3 hours with the same teacher. They're going to be getting ANDE, but they might also be getting other things in addition to that. But if they're there that day, they're there that day.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So it's like if they're in a pre-HSE math class and they're doing ANDE for 90 minutes, but then the other 90 minutes, they still have another 90 minutes. So.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's kind of the difference between those two, scenarios. In the one case, it's okay to just put everybody together because everybody who's in that class is going to be getting ANDE at some point that day. Whereas Rachel's situation is, it was kind of like everybody who showed up at that particular location during that particular period of time, regardless of who the teacher was, get lumped into the same class. So there might be a bunch of people who never see the ANDE curriculum. And in that case, we would want the ANDE portion of that to be separate from the rest of the attendance, as Rachel was suggesting. Again, I hope I'm.
Yeah, really good clarification. And that's exactly right. And again, just to reiterate our goals, we're just, if we, at the end of the day, we could say, ANDE was taught on 8 days and the student or the learner attended 6 of those 8 days when ANDE was taught. That's kind of what we're going for. And we're going to be collecting some other measures from the instructors on the frequency and of when they're teaching ANDE. But this data point would help us to understand the learner attendance. So yeah, really good clarification.
Can I jump in on that? So I'm actually, this is Rachel Arsenal from Project of Easton. I know I'm under Aaron's name there. So I actually want to jump in with Amanda, actually. So my situation is a little closer to Gianna's there. I'm kind of wondering then, with all of the students, if they are in that one class, and there's only one class using it in the agency, would that class then be able to just be labeled with the ANDE without creating a new class with it, just adding the existing name onto it then? I don't know if does that make sense? I'm not sure.
Yeah, no, I think what you're saying is you already have the class in there.
Yeah.
Um, I think
Or
this
should
was
we create
something
a
we
new
had
class?
discussed. I think it would be better in this to create a new class. Even and I understand it's like an additional class. It's the same students, it's the same teacher, and you're creating a second class. I think it would probably help the data pool to make it a new
Yes.
class.
Okay, so and that's not a problem. So that's I want to make sure for my data person, because actually my data person is out for a short leave, so I want to make sure for her that I have it correct for her. So it would be basically running the same class, just running the same attendance for them, and running one as an ANDE and one as a GED class then.
Right. And
Okay,
I mean,
not a
if you
problem.
wanted,
I just want to make sure
yeah.
it was clear for her.
You know, you could go back and like relabel the class that is quote unquote ending in December, you know, like fall or something like that. So
Okay.
it's kind of clear to you. However, I mean, I'm not telling you have to do that. I think the other thing to Michael that we want to reassure everyone is you're going to be having the second webinar in January is
And she
really
will
going
be
to,
back by then. Perfect.
right, is really going to be focused on what the whole team has decided, okay, this is the way the data entry has to be. This, so it's not like you have to become an expert on this particular one. And Michael, I believe you're going to be creating some written documentation to support it as well, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Perfect. No, that's perfect. Thank you so much. No, I just wanted to clarify on that to make sure that I was clear on that for her, because that's not a problem at all. Just making sure I was clear on how it was going to go for her too.
But we're not double counting hours, Michael. It's
No.
those class hours will go into that ANDE class now, not both that and her existing class.
Correct. Do not double count.
Good clarity there, Ruth. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a standard rule, but thank you for bringing it up in this sort of exception, since we are doing some things a little bit unique. Yeah, just trying to, again, just to use that same word again, isolate what is ANDE versus other types of instruction. But as Brian mentioned, there's some flexibility with that, and and also, as Amanda mentioned, we'll come up with some documentation that clarifies some of those points. And also the reassurance additionally that there's a good month between now and when things begin. And in addition to the documentation Amanda mentioned, we're going to also be available to support all of you with your efforts. So reaching out, connecting with us with your specific situations, from the things that you mentioned, Gianna, to your situation, Rachel, we all understand and know that each of you in your agencies working within the framework that you're allowed to, with different ways that you can arrange your classes. So we'll certainly provide the general guidelines for how to do the ANDE data entry, but then also work directly with you if you have any questions at all on how to get things set up. And I think this is one of those cases where once things are set up, then that's going to make things hopefully run smoothly afterwards. I think the setup's going to be the biggest challenge. And then Gianna, you have a follow-up?
Yes, this question was about, so if you have one teacher who's doing the treatment and then one that's not, I didn't ask for clarity around the teacher who is not, who's like the control group. Do we still want, or should we still set up the additional class and like maybe say like that's ANDE cohort 2? Because I think cohort 2 is the control group. That way we have a class that is not receiving the treatment that's also identified in eData and also has the daily attendance and all of that stuff. So like you have to have both, like you want to have your treatment group and your non-treatment group have the same data.
Yes, I believe, Carolyn, you had said that that was the case, that you wanted them all labeled the same, and then you could parse that out later.
Yes. Yes, I believe so. Brian and Ashley, let jump in if you think otherwise, but I think we want to be able to label them so we know what data to pull. And I don't think we need to differentiate between cohort 1 and cohort 2 at this time. Our team can do that with our records.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we don't, I probably missed that because I had to sign on under a different Zoom account. So I think y'all, if you said that at the beginning, I missed it. So
No worries.
we don't need to differentiate cohort 1 from cohort
No.
2?
No,
Oh, okay.
it's all the same because and again, this ties back to, you know, what was kind of mentioned, which is the data pull that we're going to do here on the MIS side for West Ed to clean the data of PII and send it their way is we're going to want to send the whole set, and then West Ed will do their magic and we'll split the groups into the separate groups on their end.
Oh, okay. All right, thanks.
No, but it's a fantastic question and probably well worth saying more than once because you know, we're sort of talking about the data entry specifically, but when you look at the study, you're seeing other bits of information. You're seeing different groups of people identified differently. So it's a natural thought that, oh, I probably need to identify these differently. Thankfully, here we're just lumping everybody under one big umbrella under the ANDE study, and that part, thankfully, is hopefully a little more straightforward, that you don't have to get down to the specific groups.
This is Amanda. I want to ask one question for my clarification. Carolyn and is it Brian, when you talk about cohorts, is that there's the treatment cohort and the control cohort, or is that like the spring pilot is cohort 1 and the fall pilot is cohort 2?
That's a great question. So really for cohort 1 would be our treatment group and cohort 2 is our control group.
Okay.
All teachers, we're really only focusing on the spring right now, but we will invite all teachers back to the fall if they would like to continue participating. Everyone who is in our control group or cohort 2 right now, they will have access to ANDE after the completion of the study. So even if they aren't teaching it now, they will have access to it in the future.
Okay. And I think I was misunderstanding how you were using cohort, and I just needed that clarification for myself. So thank you very much.
All right, it looks like we're caught up with the questions in the chat. If I missed something, please do let me know. I think we got to all of those. Any other thoughts or questions before we part ways? And as has been mentioned, there's more to come, and really appreciate all of your feedback so far. Any thoughts or comments or concerns before we part ways?
Yeah, Michael, this is Rosa.
Rosa, yes.
If a new student gets assigned to an ANDE class, do we give them the testing hours in that class? Would they be available?
So just for West Ed, for your team, what happens with instructional hours in classes is when a student is assessed with a formal assessment, the agencies are allowed to add the assessment hours, the time it takes for the adult to take the assessment. They're allowed to record those as instructional hours, and they will put those in the classes that the students are participating in. Will that be an issue if, and we're talking probably 1.5 to 2.5 hours at most, entered maybe once every several months for most students? Will that cause a problem or skew things in any way that would be problematic?
I don't think so. Yeah.
And based, I think, Brian, on what you had said about you really just needed to know that the student had instruction that day, whether it was X number of hours and minutes versus, you know, the total for the day was less of a concern. It seems like lumping in very occasionally some testing hours probably wouldn't skew things too much. Is that a safe assumption then?
Yeah, I mean, we'll be
Okay.
triangulating with other data sources. So if we know that ANDE through other data sources was taught like you know, 90 minutes twice a week or something like that, then we can kind of through with the attendance data, we can get an estimate of how much the student was exposed to ANDE.
Okay, so it sounds, Rosa, like you're okay to continue with that.
Yes, but
routine.
that will create a little discrepancy with the start dates of classes and the start date. Because we have to have that class to start when they were tested. That was my only concern. It won't be when the ANDE started, it will be when the student tested to go in that class. If it happens, maybe they go into another class too. I don't know if they're gonna have two classes.
So when they assess and then were placed in the class.
Because if they're assessed and they're going into ANDE, that's the day that I'm gonna put the test date. And that might be different when they started the class, like you were saying, that, you know, it needs to
Right.
think about it.
Rosa,
Yes.
would they, in most of those cases, that student's attendance, that date would actually be after the ANDE start date, right? Or are you saying you might have some students who assess before the class starts?
Correct.
Okay, I see what you're saying.
But it's really, is it minimal time with minimal days?
It's only one day, and depending on the test that they took, it could be 2.5 out. Well, if it's only math, I don't know. Sometimes they get the reading too, so we'll be a little longer than that. And if we are going to label that student as ANDE, those hours are going to be attached to that file.
And so
Michael?
are those pre-tests then, Rosa? So you're talking new students who are maybe coming in, taking all Administration 1 assessments, and those assessments are placing them potentially, in this case, in an ANDE class. And because of the start date definition that we now use, saying the date of first instruction, including instructional hours from assessments, is the student start date. Is that where you're saying, Rosa, that all of those considerations with the start date and the pre-tests are going to influence, or typically influence, when you choose the class's start date?
Correct.
Okay.
Because if the class starts after the student took the pre-test, it won't let me assign it to it. eData won't let me assign it to it.
Yeah, I was going to ask that. So eData doesn't allow you to add attendance to a class that is dated before the class start date, right?
That
That's
is
what you're saying.
correct. Yes.
Okay, I understand the situation.
It still sounds minimal to me. I mean, I
Yeah.
don't work for West, of course, but it sounds like from their answers before that wouldn't be necessarily a problem for them.
I think the biggest thing, and Brian, correct me if I'm wrong, or Carolyn, because I think the start date was a really big, really kind of important metric that you wanted to monitor. Is that right, Brian?
Yeah, I mean, I think we do the best that we can. It's always a little bit messy. To give you some background, the reason why we care about the start date is because you know, we're interested to know when the student first might have known that they were in an ANDE course, because that knowledge could then influence their decision about their persistence and other things. So that's kind of why we're interested in it. But I think I'm not sure I fully understand all the data entry details, but I think it sounds like that's the most feasible way to get an estimate of that date. And so if that's the case, then that's okay.
I think and just and this is brainstorming, so I'm not saying this is what should happen.
Yes.
But I think the other way to address the ANDE specific data entry items that we're talking about would be to delay the date that would be added to eData until after ANDE starts. So in other words, hold on to those hours in sort of an abstract sense that we're done with the assessment, and then put them in to eData once ANDE starts, knowing that those hours were earned, so to speak, by the student. Again, I'm not saying that's the good idea or that is an idea, but that would really be the alternative, Rosa, to the routine that you've established with the student start dates. It just might be something we have to discuss as a team and kind of get back to you on. I don't know, Amanda, if you have any strong thoughts.
I think we should probably talk about it because, I'm thinking, I think if I'm understanding Rose's situation correctly, maybe the class starts, January 28th. That's when the students actually start the class. That's excuse me. That's when the ANDE instruction actually starts, but the students may have the students who are placed into that class who are new may have been assessed on January 10th. So for the purposes of data entry, the way eData is set up, the class has to have a start date of at least January 10th or before, right, Rosa, in order for you to be able to enter. So that might be one of those things where there's, what you put in eData, and again, this is, me just thinking out loud, so that there's some kind of, so that you can accurately add the student's assessment date. Because, when we monitor, sometimes we compare what's in the student files to what's in the folder, and then, we're like, wait a second, there's a discrepancy here. So we don't want to have them putting something in that's not correct. But there might be I'm wondering if when the data are pulled or when we share them with WestEd or something, that might be something where if WestEd looks at the data and they see, wait a second, there's a whole bunch of people who have a couple of hours, the week of the 10th, but then the regular attendance doesn't start until the 28th. There might be ways to kind of say, hey, these are a couple outliers in the analysis versus adjusting the data entry to it. So I think that's one of the things that we can talk about.
Thank you.
So stay tuned, Rosa. Thank you for bringing that up. This is exactly the kind of feedback we were hoping to get from all of you, and we knew you would provide us with the practical aspects of what you do on a daily basis and give us some good food for thought. So that's any other thoughts before we go? We won't want to keep you too much past noon. I think we were thinking about just about an hour for the meeting.
I did just want to clarify one point. I think there were several questions about it, and I know we somewhat answered it earlier about if a teacher has longer than 90-minute course section. I just did want to make sure it was clear that if teachers are teaching other subject matter, then of course that's no problem. They can log the attendance and so on and so forth. But also if it's purely a math class, while each of we call them units, but they're essentially lessons, is 90 minutes, they can teach more than one unit in a class session if they would like. So I just did want to clarify that for everyone.
Thank you, Carolyn. And thank you, WestEd team. Really appreciate you being here. And I think this was really good discussion. So thank you all for your feedback, your ideas, your comments, your suggestions, your concerns. Stay tuned. This is just the first chapter in several chapters, I think, here that we're going to have, where, as was discussed, we'll have more information at least by the January 15th webinar, if not sooner, and we'll have more documentation and other things We may reach out to some of you to get clarification on some of your concerns, but overall, again, really appreciate the time from everybody, and looking forward to the study. And I think this is going to be a really good thing. So thank you very much.
Yes, thank
And-
you all.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Yes.
everyone. If I don't talk to
Thank
you,
you.
happy holidays.
Same to you.
Indeed. I second that.
Yes, happy holidays. Correct. We'll be talking later, probably.
We kind of can't avoid it, if you will.
Yes. Mhm.